Welcome, all you citizens of the world. It's time for another edition of the Live from the Heartland show. I'm Michael James here in Chicago, up in the very blue 49th Ward. And we're having another edition of the show. We've got a couple of really wonderful guests. We're going to start off with Clem Balanoff talking about labor and the election. And he is the National Political Director of the Amalgamated Transit Union. And then we're going to have an old pal, Carole Travis, the retired president of the United Auto Workers Local number 719 here in Chicago area, where they used to turn out the big Pullman trains and the locomotives. And she's down in North Carolina near Asheville and going to talk a little bit about North Carolina politics and recovering from the hurricane and tornadoes. One thing I would like to call your all attention to is that on this day, in 1968, at the Mexico City Olympics, Tommy Smith, John Carlos, and the Australian Peter Norman protested the situation for Black people and others in the world by raising their fists. You've all seen that. And if you're watching this on YouTube or on CAN TV, you'll get to see a picture of those three. All right, we're going to take a short musical break, and we'll be back to talk labor and the election and more with Clem Balanoff. Okay, all you citizens of the world, welcome back to Live from the Heartland for the week of October 19th, the year 2024. And it gives me real pleasure to bring on the next guest, the one and only Clem Balanoff. And he is the National Political Director of the Amalgamated Transit Union. And I thought of him when I was thinking about the role of labor in the current election. And I asked him if he would come on and talk about that. He said, sure, and a number of other things he'd like to talk about. What got me going was this tale of the two Seans. You know, there's the Sean O'Brien from the Teamsters and the Sean Fain from the United Auto Workers, and they couldn't have more different positions. The Teamsters didn't endorse anyone for the presidential race, although some local Teamster groups did announce that they endorse Harris. And that's roughly 24 locals and joint councils that represent about 1 million Teamsters, and they came out for the president. So after saying all that, Clem, can you give us a little hint about what was going on and the difference between those two?
Well, I'm not always sure what was going on, but the Teamsters historically have been a much more conservative union when it comes to endorsements. And locally, we have one of their international vice presidents, Juan Campos from Local 705, great guy, good friend. He led the district council or the region. It's called, what's it called? Something 25, I believe, to endorse Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. The leadership of the Teamsters said that their members voted almost 60% to endorse Donald Trump. I don't know. I've talked to a few Teamsters, and they never were polled or got any information on that. But that's what they say. But they did make no endorsement, and they're a very large union, so certainly it's not a good thing. But look, when the AFL-CIO has done some internal polling of union members, in some cases, Pennsylvania is an interesting state. Kamala Harris was behind 2 points in their polling among union members in Pennsylvania. Interestingly, Sean O'Brien comes out of TDU, supposed to be the more progressive and the left of the Teamsters. So that was a little bit of a surprise. Even the fact that they, wanted to play the game of having a poll, whether they did or not, I don't know that. The auto workers, on the other hand, certainly are strongly for Kamala Harris. And I think that, there's some of the things that Donald Trump has said about him. And I pulled up a few quotes from Donald Trump, and they were from September of 2023 in response to the UAW strike. And for the record, they got an incredible contract. The membership approved it overwhelmingly. The leadership negotiated a good contract. And what Trump said was things like the auto workers are being sold down the river by their leadership, and their leadership should endorse Trump. Auto workers are not going to have any jobs because of all these cars are going to be made in China. The electric cars automatically are going to be made in China. He wasn't a fan of them. And now all of a sudden, because Elon Musk is supporting him, he's a big fan of electric cars. And he says stuff like the heads of the unions are out of touch with their rank and file. And it goes on and on and on. His knocking unions. I mean, look, the bottom line is he's a union buster, and he'd just as soon see all the unions go away. When I say that, there was something called the PRO Act, the Protect the Right to Organize, and passed the House. You will remember that one. And not one, I repeat, not one Republican was for it. Now, in the Senate, it never came up for a vote because the thing was they had to get 50, and there were 3 senators, Democrats at the time, who were on the fence or weren't supportive. A couple of them in Arizona, Kristen Sinema and Mark Kelly. Mark Kelly's now come around. When they were considering him for vice president, all of a sudden he had a change of heart and decided he was in favor of the PRO Act because the union said, "Hey, if you have this guy, we got problems." And then there's Mark Warner in Virginia, and none of them would sign on. So our hope is, that, and as I said, I pointed that out, the fact that no Republican was in support of these things, and Donald Trump certainly has, in many cases, has, because of his importance in the Republican Party, has, told them don't vote for certain things. And I'm sure that the PRO Act is one of those kind of votes that he's made it clear that they shouldn't be voting for. Not that Republicans vote for it anyways, but, those are, because they're really been anti-union.
What's your view as to the state of the presidential race, including recent polling, although polling is polling. And so how do you see it from Labor's point of view and beyond, the general state of things?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Labor thinks of it in very similar in terms of where the race is at this point in time. And I do talk about polling because polling, it's a snapshot of what's going on at a specific time. And it's also based on the quality of the poll. It's not just saying all polls are equal, because they're not. But right now, they say that Harris has about a 1.7 percentage lead nationally. And to put that in perspective, in 2020, on this date in 2020, Joe Biden was up 8.9%. In 2016, Hillary Clinton was up at this point in time 5.5%. So at this point in time, it appears that this race could be much closer. James Carville, who I don't agree with philosophically, but his perspective is always interesting, said that if she does not win by 4% nationally, he believes she will lose this race. Now, in the swing states, though, there's a much different picture. The race is in the states of Pennsylvania. They have Trump up by 0.3%, North Carolina 1.4%, Georgia 0.7%, Arizona 1.1%, Michigan by 1%, and Nevada by 0.5%. That's under Real Clear Politics, and the and 538 has it in a couple of cases a little or an even. And so what it shows is that this election is really, at this point in time, probably a dead heat. And we have to win. In order for Kamala Harris to win, we have to win the blue wall, which is Michigan and Pennsylvania, and the 1 seat in Nebraska, because Nebraska gives out their electoral votes slightly differently. They do it by congressional districts in part. And there's one district around Omaha, which Democrats are doing extremely well in, the Democratic candidates. So I think that, but that's what she has to win. That gets her to 270. And, it's interesting because people like Nate Silver from 538, 2 weeks ago, he said he'd rather have Kamala Harris's hand to play. Now he says it's 50-50. Where James Carville said 2 or 3 weeks ago, he thought that the race was Kamala's to lose. Now he says he's not a fan of the way she's been handling things, because he didn't believe she should be sitting for so many interviews. And the reason is that because the interviewer can ask you whatever you want, whatever they want, and that could hurt her. He says that she needs to focus more on really beating up Trump for what he said. The Cook Political Report said that, Harris has a slight lead, but the underlying voting trends favor Trump. That's in there. She was talking specifically, Amy Walters, about Pennsylvania. And, but one of the things I think in Pennsylvania that I think is interesting is we have to remember both John Fetterman and Josh Shapiro won handily in Pennsylvania just a few years ago. So, I think that there's some reason, there's definitely reason for hope. But
what gives you some optimism around all this?
Well, I think turnout will be key. When I say that, I really mean, whoever has a better, voter turnout operation. And I think Democrats, by and large, have a much better operation to turn voters out. We saw yesterday in Georgia 300,000 people voted yesterday early on the first day of early voting in Georgia. And it was in 2020, that was less than 150,000. I don't know the exact number, I'm sorry. But it's not now. So that certainly gives us hope. When we look at some of the counties where this happened at, in Fulton County, which is Atlanta, Cobb County, DeKalb, or as we call it in Illinois, DeKalb. Those are counties that are pretty Democratic, and there was pretty heavy voting there. Now, but we also have to understand that since the pandemic, and as early voting and non-election day voting gets easier, more and more people are going to be voting early. Like there probably this election, I mean, people feel that more than 60% of people will cast their ballots non-election day. Now, in some states, they mail everybody a ballot because they're trying to get away from election day voting. But still in all, I mean, it will be more than half of the electorate, could be 65% will vote non-election day. And that means that elections become more expensive because you have to campaign for a much longer period of time. And, that's a whole different topic, is how things are funded. Because, I mean, I think, Michael, that myself, as you, David Orr, and many others really do believe that we need David Melton, that we really do need campaign finance reform in this country if we're going to win. Because too often, the very wealthy are more and more controlling elections.
Well, Clem Balanoff, let me ask you, what are some important issues that people say will help them decide who to vote for?
Sure. It's the, for Democrats, one of the better issues is abortion. And many people have said, in an NBC story just yesterday, or CNBC's MSNBC story yesterday, they were talking about, for Democrats and for Kamala Harris, that is the top issue. That they will vote on. And in the Senate race in Texas, they say in Texas, 75 or 80% of people are in support of abortion, of the right to choose for women making their own decisions. For Donald Trump, his people would like him to be talking about immigration and the economy. Now, it's interesting because, I mean, the economy, prices are up, wages are up, not quite as much. And certainly, but if you compare it to, like the past and Republicans as a whole, the working men and women do much better when Democrats are president than Republicans as a whole. So I think those are, three issues. In some states, there are other issues, and certainly Palestine and Michigan, very, very important. And, it's, people like myself, I don't believe that Harris and Biden have the right position. But, but I think that's where those are, four issues that I think are going to really are on people's minds and are going to help determine, the winner. And then
let me just say around the Palestine question, I really think it's problematic for Israel in the world for generations now, I think, in the future. And I think here, let's just talk about the Democratic Party, which we're involved with, but necessarily don't always agree with some of the Big Ten pictures, that I think that younger people are from the get, pretty pro-Palestine. Right. And are less inclined to support Democrats or be involved in the actual party processes. So I think that's an issue that the Democrats are going to have to deal with. And I do think that Kamala Harris really needs to sort of separate herself a little bit on that issue and say something good. Yeah, well, she has, but, it's mired in a lot of other stuff.
Yeah, well, I was kind of disappointed when she was on The View, in the last week, and they said, is there anything that you differ with Joe Biden on? And she thought of it, and she says, no, I can't think of anything. I mean, it's difficult. And it's not to say that many things that Joe Biden did aren't very good. Look, I come from the Amalgamated Transit Union. We represent bus drivers and train operators across the United States. In the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, there was $107 billion, the biggest infusion of cash in public transit in the history of this country. We got additional safety protections, and he's been great to transit workers. But there are things that certainly she should be separating herself from. And unfortunately, too often we see her kind of separating and going to the right as opposed to going to the left, but because she's trying to win an election. And, although I think that elections are about contrast, I mean, you can't get far enough to the right to get a gun nut. She can say, hey, somebody comes to my house, I'm going to shoot him. But you can't, she's not going to be able to pick up the NRA sorts. And so she should really stick to her positions, and I think, show the very serious differences, including the threat to our democracy. I mean,
yeah. Well, you're not the only one that's saying that. We hope that in the next 3 weeks, and that's about all we have left,
right.
That she does take a stronger position on some of this stuff.
Right. Well, I mean, I think she has to take a stronger position. She also has to be more attacking of Donald Trump.
Yeah.
There are many people have now said, and Barack Obama was talking about black men and black men voting, and she's trailing where Joe Biden was in 2020 among black men. And I think one of the things, all they have to do is they have to say, hey, look, let's talk about Donald Trump in his own words and what he said, and take half a dozen quotes and put them up there and let people know. I mean, I think that the campaign has to be more hard hitting. Or a commercial that was done in 2020 showed a bunch of kids watching TV and different shots, and they had quotes that Donald Trump had made, and they said, do you really want your kids to see this? Is this the kind of leader that we want? I mean, good stuff. I don't understand why we don't see more of it now, but I'm certainly very hopeful. And one of the things that I'm on a call weekly with the AFL-CIO political directors, and that's one of the things I think we have talked about, and we're going to really probably have a much more robust discussion about tomorrow, about what individual unions can do specifically about their membership in this, not only in the swing states, but with black men or some of the undecideds that we have.
Well, I'm going to ask you a little bit about what people can do in the remaining time. But before I do that, let's talk a little bit about the Senate race.
Real quick.
Yeah. And there's a number of things that are in play for us. We didn't, I've been going to Texas for years now with basketball in the barrio and Athletes United for Peace. And I've heard for 20-something years how it's going to turn blue, and it hasn't quite gone that way. But, Beto O'Rourke is out there working hard for Colin Allred. And, so we have a shot there. It looks like Florida, Nebraska. What do you got on that?
Yeah, well, let me first tell you about this. Initially, there were 7 seats that the Democrats absolutely had to win in order to control the Senate. And those were Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, Michigan, Nevada, and Wisconsin. It looks like we're going to win 6 of the 7. Montana is a really tough state. We're about 7 points behind. I think it's going to be very difficult to win that state. So we had to expand the map. And the 3 that they had looked at, as you very adequately pointed out, were Texas, Florida, and Nebraska. Now, Florida looks like it's kind of slipping away. Texas, on the other hand, the race has tightened up significantly between Colin Allred and Ted Cruz just last night. In the only debate in the race, Colin Allred had an extremely strong debate performance yesterday, which we hope will give him a little bump. But if we lose just Montana, they will control the Senate. And what that means is you won't be able to, the next president, assuming it's Kamala Harris, will not be able to appoint Supreme Court justices or judges at all. They won't be able to, appointments to her cabinet and others that require Senate approval won't happen, or they'll have to be so compromised. We won't be able to change the rules to allow for the codification of Roe versus Wade. It's that type of thing. Nebraska is a very interesting one. It's like, yeah, I know this. It's there's no Democrat running, so Osborne is the de facto a Democrat, and he's running a really strong race. He's the head of the Bakery and Confectionery Workers Local. He's a union guy. Seems like a really good guy. I was talking to his campaign a week and a half ago or so, and they're more optimistic that things are changing. And it's interesting because I hope that, like 2 weeks ago, the presidential race looked like it was trending more towards Kamala Harris. And sometimes when that trend starts stopping, other people start, it stops momentum on other people's, on other races down ballot for U.S. Senate. But it's a very close race. And our hope is certainly that we can either win in Nebraska or Texas, and that'll give us 50-50. And then the vice president, assuming it's Tim Walz, will break the tie. So, it's they're tough, but these races. But look, this is a close election. This country is very, very divided. Sometimes I scratch my head and don't understand why and how anybody could vote for Donald Trump. But, I really do.
I'm amazed. I'm blown away that people can, and I realize that people are not watching the same news or reading the same papers that I am. And a lot of people, they don't. So we only got a couple minutes left, Clem, on this segment of Live from the Heartland for the week of October 19th. But I'd like to ask you, what in the remaining days can people of conscience do?
Okay. Well, there are things that you can do from Illinois, and there are things that you can go to one of the swing states. We're closest to Wisconsin. And I tell people, there's buses going all the time. Jan Schakowsky, call her office. She has an opportunity, not her office, her political office. And they have buses every week going up to Wisconsin. If people want to do something, they can get in a car with a couple of friends. And I encourage them to go further north, because a lot of the buses go to the border towns.
Well, Katie Hogan, from the show, they've been going further and further each time.
Yeah. Right. I tell people, if you want to do something, somebody said, well, who should I give money to? I said, look, money doesn't seem to be the issue in these races. Get up to Green Bay, knock on a few doors, bring 3 friends, go up to Door County, get out to Eau Claire or to La Crosse, go to a little further north where we're not getting the tremendous influx of people knocking on doors, but people can write postcards, and there's always postcard writing parties all over the place. You can make calls. There's virtual phone banks to call into all of the swing states and all of the Senate races that are important, that people can do.
I think there are people who could just pick up their phone and call people they know in other states.
Oh, that's right. That's a virtual phone bank, and they do that all the time. And I think that people should do that. It's like, look, get involved a little bit, make a few calls, write a few postcards, get on a bus, drive up there with a couple of friends. It's a nice time. The leaves are changing in northern in Wisconsin, so it's a great trip. You'll have a good time, hang out with them at night, and work on Saturday and Sunday.
Well, you and I, we've been through a lot of elections, and we've had some burners. We've had some that have hurt. We've had some joyous victories, and one way or another, we'll be talking and working together to make this world a little bit better.
Yeah,
we're in a good place here in Illinois, and people should be really grateful for that. And we have to spread it.
Yes.
So,
no.
You got any parting words?
Well, no, Michael. Just that you've been fighting in the good fight for God.
I'm old.
70. Well, okay, I'm old too. I tell people. They say, why do you have so many stories? I said, I'm 71, for Christ's sake. You do a lot of things.
Well, like that. I'm at 82, hitting 83.
Oh, yeah, I know.
We'll be having you back on the show sometime after the election.
I'd love to be. Thank you much. And we'll talk.
All right. Thank you, Clem Balanoff. And everybody else, you stay tuned here on the left end of your dial or however you're getting Live from the Heartland. We'll be right back after a musical break, a station break, depending where you're hearing it. And our next guest will be Carole Travis talking about politics and hurricanes in North Carolina. Be right back. All you citizens of the world, welcome to Live from the Heartland, the second half of the show for the week of October 19th, the year 2024. I'm Michael James, and I'm talking to an old friend of mine. We are both old, and we've known each other since 1960. It's the one and only Carole Travis, who I met when we were together at Lake Forest College, and she went on to be the executive director for a time of the Service Employees International Union Illinois State Council. She is the retired president of the United Auto Workers Local 719, where they used to build locomotives. She's a longtime activist, a lawyer. And I'm going to say she is the daughter of the renowned Bob Travis, fighting Bob Travis, who led the Flint sit-down strikes in the 30s. And Carole came to mind. She and her partner, Steve Tapas, they live in North Carolina, and they live right near Asheville. So I thought of them when with not only all the politics going on in North Carolina, but with the hurricane and the tornadoes. And we've got her here, and this is not the first time she's been on the show. Back on May 14th, 2022, she was on. So, Carole, I know I've got you in a parking lot there somewhere, and so far, can you still hear me?
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
So let's start with politics.
Okay.
You don't know what's going to happen, right, in North Carolina,
Exactly.
but it's certainly come into play with the Democrats these days. They're talking about it as a possible pickup state.
Right. First of all, it's hard to tell what's going to happen here because we are categorized as a toss-up, and I'm not connected the way I used to be here and there, so I know what everybody knows, that I know some more than that, but it is a toss-up, and we don't know what people who don't listen to CNN or MSNBC or hear about Mark Robinson. We think that who's the current lieutenant governor, who's the black Nazi, who's the pornography with trans people, but is also called trans people vermin. But we hear all the stuff about him, and also that he and his wife ran a daycare center, which was closed by the state because it was filthy and they weren't taking care of kids, blah, blah, blah. But I don't know what people who don't listen to the same sources I listen to know about Mark Robinson. So I know he's saying that's all lies, so that maybe that's all they hear. So I don't know. But there's a lot of work being done, and there's the new chairman of the Democratic Party in North Carolina is a young woman. I think her last name is Clayton, but she's 24 years old and she comes from a farming family. So she's a long time, deep roots, connected, and has a sense of how to talk to people in rural areas, which in general, the Democratic Party is not strong on, right? It's much more an urban, coastal, etc. party. Anyway, so I don't know.
Well, we have great hope. In the governor's race, the running against this guy, Mark Robinson, is a guy named Josh Stein. And what do you think his chances are? Any sense? He's got Roy Cooper, the current governor, who I think has been very good. And, he was in consideration for the vice presidential spot.
Right.
He can't run because he's served 2 terms already. Any sense on how that race might turn out?
I think that because of Robinson being so terrible, and because everybody knowing it, and because Josh Stein is so good, he's a former attorney general here. And there's been a lot of money flowing in to help Stein in hopes that it also helps Harris Walz, that you do Democratic work, that it helps the whole slate. And everybody talks about the importance of voting the whole slate, because the woman who's running, for example, for head of public education, whose last name is Morrow, I can't remember her first name, but she has said it would be a good way to raise money would be to have pay-per-view, firing squad, murder, execution of Obama. And she thinks public schools are brainwashing institutions, and she's running for the head of the head of the Board of Education for North Carolina.
It brings back a memory for me. I had a relative or a good friend of my grandmother's, et cetera, who came from New York, I think originally, but was involved in education big time in North Carolina. And it really, my understanding was North Carolina had a real good public school system at one time.
Yes. And because I'm old and don't have any children or grandchildren here, I don't know as much as I might, but it appears that at least Buncombe County, which is where Asheville and where we live, has not only a good system, but it had been talking about joining with Asheville and having Asheville and the whole county work together for the schools. And Asheville has a very good school system. Asheville is like the Berkeley of the South, or it's like Austin, Texas. It's a home for transgender, gay people, lefties, socialists, artists, beer drinkers, music people, people who do edgy healthcare practices, which I'm a taker of, a fan of. Right.
Well,
Anyway,
I was in Asheville one time, and I was working in the film The Fugitive. I played. I'm in the scene of the train wreck scene, and I went with some noted actor whose name I don't remember, and we drove.
David Jansen. No,
no, it wasn't him. We drove from the town of Cherokee to Asheville, and I had an onion loaf at Chili's. So that's my only experience, but I'm coming down to see you guys. Let me go back to the ballot again on the presidential ballot. My understanding is that in North Carolina, both Kennedy and Cornel West are both on the ballot. True? And
that's correct.
What kind of impact might that have?
Well, I have no idea what impact, although there was a young person who lives kind of across the street doesn't make exact sense because I live in a semi-rural area, but down the road a piece, who is a trans kid who grew up here, whose stepfather doesn't like him because he's trans and also he's a little crazy. But he was giving me a long thing about that he's a socialist. This was a few weeks ago. He's changed now. He goes back and forth. He was a socialist and he's not voting for anybody because they're not good enough, and very conscious of Gaza, very conscious of electric cars have lithium batteries that are mined by people in Africa who die by the exposure to lithium and so on and so forth. So I don't know, but I do know, there is one thing I do know. In spite of the flood, which I want to say some things about too, because it's very much, and the hurricane. All of the ballots and all of the machines for Asheville are fine. And they are now, I just heard on the radio, and by the way, radio is very important in disaster situations because you can't get television, you can't get but radio, the minute you get power, you can get radio. So radio has been very important here for reports. So we don't have a radio. We get radio in the car, but we don't have a radio. So everybody, it's of climate change, get a little radio. But anyway,
let's switch to the ramifications or just the situation. I know I called you guys and I texted you and emailed you for a number of days and didn't get anything back, and we were really concerned. And then our mutual friend Mary Driscoll, and she got a hold of a lot of us and let us know that you guys were safe and sound. How about Carole Travis? How about you give us a kind of a picture from when it was coming, what you thought might happen, what happened, and give us your personal recounting of these days when the hurricane struck and the tornadoes were moving around.
We had no idea. I've never been in a hurricane, so I had no idea what that means, that it's coming. But 2 days before the Helene arrived, we had torrential rains, and they went on 2 days endlessly. And so by the time Helene got here, the soil was so soaked that when the winds came, thousands of trees have been uprooted and blown around, and on houses, on cars, on roads, on like that, because the roots couldn't hold because it was mud. It was no longer in the earth, it was in mud. And so just a tremendous devastation of trees and the impact of the trees hitting things. But the bulk of the storm came, the worst part of the storm came in the middle of the night. And Steve and I are deaf, you know. So we went to sleep, and I didn't hear anything, you know. I was like sleeping, and I wake up, and what I hear, we had a Generac, and we were very lucky because we had a full house Generac, and we were the only people in our neighborhood who had any power for 14 days. And so everybody came to our house to charge their cell phones, to have coffee in the morning, to say hello to each other, and to say what they had heard, what we had all heard. We were so everybody else was without power for 14 days. Our Generac died, I think or maybe they were out with 13 days. Our Generac died at 5 a.m. one day, and I'm not sure why. And we can't get anybody because it's not important anymore, because at 5 that evening, we all got power. The whole neighborhood got power. So that was after 13 or 14 days, 13 days. And we had the Wednesday before gotten water finally, which was dirty water. We told it, you had to boil it to use it for anything. And so, but it flushed toilets, which is a big deal. You know, if you can't flush your toilet for 13 days, gets pretty shitty, you know. So people were going down to streams and places like that, and hot tubs. Some people have hot tubs. So people were taking water out of their hot tubs once they finally, oh, I have a hot tub, I can go down and get some water. Were carrying buckets. People were carrying buckets everywhere to flush their toilets. Then you can't wash your clothes, or it's, you know, some people did wash their clothes, but to wash your clothes in water that's got shit in it, chemicals in it, you know, it's not, I didn't do any laundry until we got a clean, no boil order, which was only about 4 days ago. And then I did 11 loads of laundry, washed everything, you know, because it just, the whole place felt filthy. It was hard to get gas for your car for a while. My car had 186 miles I could go with gas. So and I'm an old person. I don't have grandchildren, children, anybody to look after. So I didn't try and get gas at the beginning because I didn't want to sit on a line 3 or 4 or 5 hours and then get to the pump and have it run out. I figured I'll just wait until finally there's more gas here and so on. So I did that. But I waited about 5 or 6 days before I went and got out a full tank of gas. It is right now, so we have clean water, we have power, and those things make a big difference. So we don't have telephone service. That's why I'm sitting in a parking lot, you know, because we have no internet, we have no cell service, no texting at home.
When you were driving to the parking lot, what's the scene like? Are the roads clear? Were there thousands of trees?
Oh yeah, no. So it's now, what is it? 2 weeks, 3 weeks? Maybe it's 3 weeks. What's today? 2.5 weeks, something. I don't, you lose track of time. But I think it's 2.5 weeks since it hit. It hit on a Friday, and this is Wednesday. So tomorrow will be 3 weeks. But the number of people who came in, and the state, the federal, the volunteers, the stuff from all over the country, from Canada, that came in. So they came in, and the first thing they did was clear the trees. That was the first thing. You had to get the trees out of the way. And so it took, I mean, there's still roads, back roads that were washed out or have trees or don't exist anymore. But all of the main roads have had the trees at least put to the side. And even Blue Ridge Parkway was opened a few days ago. It was closed for a while. So within a week, you could get around. If you could get to a main road, if you were not isolated because your own road was washed out or really your really rural area, you could get around. It took a long time for grocery stores to open. One grocery store opened near where we are. It was the first one. I guess they had their own big generator. Plus, I think they got supplies from the east and the south or something, because US 40, which is a road which goes from the east to the west coast, or the west coast to the east coast. It goes all the way across. If you get it around LA, and I don't know where it ends. I think it ends somewhere in North Carolina, on the Carolina coast or something. But it was washed away to our west. And one of our north-south highways, 26, was washed out to our north. So no trucks could come in with supplies or anything from the west or from the north. So Chinook helicopters were used by the feds, to bring in a lot of stuff. We got a lot of water pretty fast, bottled water and so on. It is very stressful. I mean, it is, even when you're kind of getting along and so on and so forth, you suddenly find yourself totally exhausted, and in ways that can only be measured by its stress, that it's just like, this is so weird and difficult and different and so on. And one of the points I want to make about all of this, then all the line, after they cleared the trees, then the utilities guys came in to get power. So that was the second step. And there's still areas without power, but we have power. Parts of Asheville was hurt worse than we were, and the water treatment plant in Asheville was wiped out, and a lot of the river. Let me give you I was trying to think of how to say it. If the Chicago River flooded the way the Suwannee River and the French Broad River flooded, it would be as if it rose so that it left its banks and went 5 blocks in each direction, and went as high as the second story of buildings 4 blocks away, 5 blocks away. So it went from, it's on both sides. So it took away houses. People died in the houses who didn't get out. There were warnings, it's coming, plus the water had already risen and people were frightened. So a lot of people left, but the degree in which it left its banks we're about 2 blocks away from the creek that's at the bottom of a hill that we're on. And so we're both up and away, but maybe 3 blocks. So let's say 3 blocks. And we're up on a hill. So the creek, which is normally a pretty nice creek and a nice ravine and so on, became a raging river, and became 2 football fields wide. And although it didn't rise the way the French Broad did, it didn't go up, 2 stories or, like that, but it became 2 football fields wide and just raging down. And it, right near us, it took a bridge out that was between our side of the road and the main road, which is on the other side of the creek. And we could get out, and also they had a back way that everybody on that road that normally use that bridge could get out. But and a lot of rural roads were totally washed away. And so the River Arts District, which was had food, music, bars, beer bars, art, a lot of art studios, famous famous restaurants, the 12 Bones barbecue place, blah, blah, blah. And wonderful political murals everywhere and a lot of art stuff. That's the place that was right along the river where the French Broad River rose so high that it was like 5 blocks on either side and 2 stories high. It totally took out that whole area. A lot of buildings, a lot of art, a lot of this and that. It's gone.
Carole, have you driven into Asheville?
Yes, I have, to parts of Asheville, and everything is very, the main roads are pretty open. Asheville, because it has its whole water supply was damaged. A lot of Asheville has no water and no power. I was at somebody's. I was getting an acupuncture treatment yesterday. From Chad Johnson, who's fantastic. Anyway, his place has no water, but it had power and internet. And his house, which is not far from where he lived, also had no water, but power and internet. And it's very spotty. Some people have internet and nothing else. Or I think you have to have power to have internet. So people who have internet also have power. But a lot of people in Asheville have neither water nor power. And they're rebuilding it from the ground up. The Army Corps of Engineers is in here and doing a fantastic job of really quickly, the way they did the Baltimore Bridge when the Baltimore Bridge collapsed. They got people in here like that, and they're working and doing miraculous work to reestablish a new comprehensive water system for an entire city. It's a phenomenal job. They're doing it a little at a time, and it's coming along in ways that people are both astonished, but to be without water is really terrible. I want to make one point before I leave. This is climate change, which means that terrible storms are going to happen everywhere, and that people this is not going to be abnormal. And so it's really important that people get it, that how important the climate change is and how important getting fossil fuel out of the air is. And I want to recommend that people watch a movie called Kiss the Ground. It's not the greatest movie, but it's the most important movie. And it talks about agricultural practices which can take carbon out of the air in addition to, stopping the fossil fuel stuff. And that concludes my rant, my speech.
Carole, you did great. I'm glad we were able to hook up. We took a few tries here and you had to move your car around. I'm glad you and Steve are good, and we'll be staying in touch with you. You're always welcome back on the show. I'd like to thank everybody who tuned in today, or however you're watching or listening to Live from the Heartland. I want to thank the people who make the show possible: Hal James, Katie Hogan, Tom Clark, Lynn Orman. I want to thank our guests, Clem Balanoff and Carole Travis. And I got to tell you one thing. Watch Charlie Chaplin, The Last Words of the Great Dictator. It's something you will inspire you in the next days before the big election. We'll be back next week with more guests. Together, we can make a big difference. So do good in the world, because the world needs all the good that you do, that I do, that Hal does, that Carole does. And we'll see you next week.